When I was a sophomore in college, I met a girl, well called Jessica, at a party I attended. She didn't go to my college, but she was friends with some of the guys at the party. She was beautiful and outgoing, and seemed to take an interest in me right away. She spent the entire night talking to me and asking questions about me. I was a bit confused as to why such a good-looking girl was taking interest in me, but I was of course very happy about it at the time. After exchanging numbers at the party, we started to text back and forth pretty regularly. I hadn't really had a girlfriend before, so I was thrilled at the thought of getting to know her. Just a few days after the party, Jessica invited me to her place for dinner. She sent me her address, which was the address of a house. I asked if she still lived with her parents, but she said the place was hers, so I figured she was likely renting. I got myself ready and called a taxi. This was before Uber and Lyft. It was around 4:30 p.m. at this point, and the drive took about 20 minutes. The taxi dropped me off at a dead-end street which looked deserted. It was in the middle of winter, so the sun had already set. I decided to call her. No answer. I sent her a few messages expressing my confusion and walked around a bit. The street only had a few houses on it, all of which looked to be abandoned. I had a strange feeling, so I decided to call another taxi to take me back home. That was when I heard footsteps coming from behind me. There were 3 men wearing all black walking towards me. They didn't say a word, but it didn't take me long to realize that their intentions were bad. I hit the ground running in the opposite direction. They started yelling at me and began to chase after me. I knew I couldn't outrun them for long, so my plan was to get out of their line of sight and hide. Luckily, it was dark, so it would be a lot easier to blend in. I circled around one of the houses, but one of the men split off to cut me off. When I saw him approaching me from the other side of the house, I changed directions and ran into the forest. I knew that the trees and debris would slow them down, so running into there would be my best bet. I ran, not looking back, for as long as I could, until my legs practically gave out. I ducked in a nearby bush, trying to quiet my breathing as much as possible. I could hear the sound of footsteps in the distance, but it was faint. Eventually, the forest fell quiet, and I figured they had given up. I waited for at least an hour before I mustered up the courage to make my way out of the forest. My body was covered in scratches from running into branches. I wasn't really sure which way I had entered the forest, so I picked a direction and decided to walk in it. I eventually made it out into a residential area and called a taxi from there. I immediately went to the police station to file a report. They told me that my report wasn't the first they heard of this scheme. Apparently, these men were using pretty women to lure men into deserted areas and rob them. I gave them all of the information I had on the men, as well as Jessica, which is probably a fake name. The phone she was using to communicate with me turned out to be a burner phone. The police looked into it, but I don't think they ever found anything. All I can say is, be careful when meeting up with strangers. This happened to be a few years ago at a college party I went to. I believe I was in my first year of college. I had a ton of friends and acquaintances at this school, so we would often all go to parties together, as most college kids do. One time, our friend Kyle received an invitation to an open house happening on the other side of town. He didn't know the host well, but open houses were usually a good time, as long as they weren't instantly busted by the police. We all hopped into one vehicle and drove to the party. When we got there, the place was packed, which is the usual when it comes to open houses. Luckily, the house was huge, so it could accommodate a large number of people. We scanned the crowd and realized that we didn't know any familiar faces. In fact, most of the people there seemed to be much older than us, likely in their 30s instead of their early 20s. This didn't really bother us, and we entered the house and began drinking and making some friends. Everyone we talked to seemed nice, and we even started to make some friends with a group of guys who had also come to the party together. There were about 4 or 5 of them. I don't remember their names, but I was drinking at the time. They all seemed really interested in becoming friends with us. They gave us some vodka shots, and I was feeling quite drunk at this point. That's when one of the guys from their group told us that they wanted to show us something in the backyard. We assumed it would be some fireworks or something of the sort, so we made our way through the crowd and followed them into the backyard. The yard was huge and lined with a ton of trees that led into a deep forest. We followed them down the steps and onto the grass. I laughed and asked what it was that they wanted to show us. That's when one of them responded, "It's in the forest." Being drunk and feeling adventurous, all of my friends agreed to follow them. It was dark, but luckily we had our phones with flashlights, so we were able to light the way somewhat. After what was probably 5 minutes of walking, the men all stopped and fell silent. We were very confused, and after a few moments of this, the men turned around to face us and pointed guns at us. We froze and knew instantly that we had walked right into their trap. They ordered us to hand over our wallets, keys, phones, and anything of value. They even took my belt. Then they booked it, running towards the way we came as fast as they could. We stood there in shock for a moment, and it was then that we realized making it out of the forest without any flashlights would be difficult. We all did our best to retrace our steps, and eventually we made it back out. We saw flashlights coming from the front of the house and knew that the party had likely gotten busted. We looked around and saw that my buddy's car was gone. We reported everything to the police, but they didn't really take us seriously and assumed that we were just some drunk idiots playing a prank on them. Eventually, we were able to file a report and ended up finding my buddy's car a few weeks later. It was abandoned not far from where the party took place. We never got any of our stuff back though. Looking back now, I'm pretty sure the guns the men had were fake, but even so, I doubt they would have let us go without a fight. I had just started college and was really looking forward to a fun college experience filled with parties and friends. When I moved into the dorms, I met my roommate, who I'll call Adam. He was a quiet and reserved guy, not someone I could see myself getting along with that well, as I'm a very extroverted person. At first, it wasn't all that bad. I wouldn't really ever see the guy much, and I spent a lot of my time going out. We sort of kept our distance from each other. A few months into the semester, I was out drinking with some friends. The bar was closing, so we decided to bring the party back to my dorm. It wasn't a big group of people, just me and my 4 other friends. We were all just chatting and having a good time in the living area of the dorm. That's when Adam, my roommate, came out of his bedroom. He didn't say anything. He just stood in his doorway and stared at us silently, with a mean look in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He was silent. We all stared at each other in confusion. Then he went back into his room and slammed the door shut. We all laughed it off and continued drinking. It was a Saturday night, so he couldn't really be that mad that we were up. Plus, we weren't being very loud. The next day, I went to go get some groceries, and when I came back, my room was absolutely trashed. Papers ripped up, clothes thrown everywhere, holes in the wall. There was even writing on the wall above my bed. The writing said, "You're next." I instantly knew that this had to be Adam, but I had no idea he was capable of this. Needless to say, I reported this to the staff of the school instantly, and he was ordered to leave the dorm immediately. I waited outside of the dorm room with some staff while he packed up his stuff. When he passed by me on his way out, he stopped and whispered to me, "I'm going to end you." This sent shivers down my spine, but I decided not to say anything back to provoke him. Thankfully, I haven't seen Adam since that incident. I asked the school staff what became of him, but they all told me that he had left the school that day and never returned. Nobody could get into contact with him or his parents, and the school has yet to receive compensation for the damages he caused.